Greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unpacking Islamophobia podcast, a Bridge Initiative at Georgetown University project. My name is Arsalan Iftikhar. I am an international human rights lawyer, senior research fellow at the Bridge Initiative, and author of the book Fear of a Muslim Planet: Global Islamophobia in the New World Order. My guest today is Abed Ayoub, who currently serves as the National Executive Director of the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, also known as ADC, the country's largest Arab American civil rights organization based in Washington, D.C. Throughout his career, Abed has worked to address issues impacting Arabs and Muslims across the United States, including dealing with matters related to discrimination, immigration, hate crimes, surveillance, and profiling, just to name a few. Under his leadership, the ADC has become the leading voice for Arab Americans on domestic issues and foreign issues, and Abed is a regular commentator on national and international media outlets and has developed a strong reputation for his commitment to social justice. A native of Dearborn, Michigan, he graduated from the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law in 2005. Abed Ayoub, my friend, assalamu alaikum, and thank you for joining us today.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you. I appreciate it.
So, Abed, as the head of ADC, I wanted to first sort of get a 30,000-foot altitude view from you in terms of what is the difference, in your opinion, between the anti-Arab and anti-Palestinian racism and sentiment that we're seeing now in the United States compared to what we've seen in the past, primarily in the last 20 years since September 11th?
There are a lot of similarities between the hate we're seeing now and after September 11th, particularly when it comes to the number of cases, the types of cases. But the biggest difference is what we're seeing now, the attacks are far more sophisticated. For example, the attacks on folks in the workplace, on employees, whether they be attorneys, doctors, students, professors, we're seeing a really coordinated effort to attack our community members and attack people that speak on in support of our community. And that's happening, across the country. That happened in the immediate aftermath of October 7th. We began seeing mass layoffs, people let go of their jobs, people having offers rescinded, law firms coming out saying they're not going to hire anybody that posted, any pro-Palestine messages. And the underlying actions that these individuals were taking were not necessarily discriminatory or racist. All they did was show support for Palestine. There was nothing anti-Semitic about them. But the way the other side went about in targeting these individuals was very sophisticated. And that includes using LinkedIn, using social media platforms, sharing contact information of major, the HR professionals at major organizations, major law firms, DMing them information, sending them screenshots. So it's as if this plan was in place and they just needed to switch and turn it on. And that's what happened. Post 9/11, a lot of the discrimination we've seen was knee-jerk reaction, I like to call it, where a Muslim woman is harassed at a grocery store, or someone is called a derogatory name while they're out in public, right? And that just happened. This is more planned. This is something that is orchestrated and happening at a mass level across the country. Now, even months out after 10/7, we're still seeing the attacks, and we're still seeing a level of sophistication that is leading not just to, reaching out to HR professionals, but now having lawmakers on board, having others on board, pushing this agenda of silencing the community, makes it far more dangerous, in our opinion.
And generally speaking, Abid, can you give us a snapshot of where you're seeing a lot of this discrimination, whether it's in the workplace, whether it's in schools? Give us a snapshot in terms of the different areas where people are impacted.
We are seeing it in the workplace. We did see a significant rise in employment cases at our organization. And I know other organizations like CARE and Palestine Legal have also documented a sharp rise in employment discrimination cases. We're seeing it on college campuses with the encampments. We began seeing it on college campuses prior to that, in around November, December of 2023, when folks were trying to get the SJPs shut down. They were introducing bills to stop Palestine groups from forming or having the charters taken away. And the discrimination and the hate crimes we're typically used to seeing in headlines those are happening all over the country. In Chicago, we had the 6-year-old Wadia who was stabbed and killed, by somebody that he thought was a family friend, somebody that lived in the same house as him. And then you see the hate crimes cases, whether it be in Michigan, New York, Florida, California. So it's really across the country geographically. It's not isolated to one part of the nation or one industry or one area of practice in the nation. It's prevalent.
And as a follow-up to that, what's being done to push back? Obviously both by ADC and the greater community at large, and what needs to be done long term to be able to ameliorate things?
Well, pushing back is important. And when it comes to the employment cases, what we have to remember is when we see an employment case, that's the end of the assembly line. So something must have happened before, and what our experience through the past few months has shown, the attempts to paint who Arab employees are, or what Muslim employees stand for, or what the beliefs are of Palestinians, that's happening at the DEI and the DEI HR front, right? So there have been coordinated efforts by folks who oppose us, getting into those rooms, making their presentations. So we quickly learned by the time we receive an intake, it's the end of the assembly line. There's something we're missing at the beginning. So we've diverted a lot of effort and resources into these DEI efforts, into getting in front of HR professionals, giving them material, helping form employee resource groups, helping employees, give them the tools to talk about, themselves and promote, fix issues for themselves in the workplace before it gets to an employment discrimination case. So that's an area I think we failed as a community. It's an area we need to put a lot more resources and energy into, training the DEI professionals, training the employees on that front. So we are investing resources on that. The biggest difference we're seeing now and post 9/11 is the attempts to silence our community based on Israel and based on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And that is what's leading to a lot of rises in discrimination and hate crimes. So tackling that issue and getting the Palestinian perspective, getting the pro-peace perspective out there on that issue will bring down the hate crime and the hate incidents and the discrimination we are seeing, and garnering just an understanding of who our people are. And I know that sounds cliche, but that has to happen at this moment. I think that is happening. And I think the polls are showing a lot more sympathies and a lot more understanding towards the Palestinian cause. That in turn will bring down the hatred in the community. So keeping those pressures going, supporting those movements, supporting the students, speaking out, that's going to garner an understanding of who we are in the long term.
Before we move on, Abed, I wanted to kind of follow up a little bit in terms of the hate crimes, and I'd like our listeners to have a little bit more of a snapshot of the stories that you mentioned. Obviously, the young 6-year-old Palestinian boy who was stabbed, I think 27 times by his 71-year-old white landlord in Plainfield, Illinois, a suburb of Chicago, where I grew up. But then there was also the shooting of 3 Palestinian college students in Vermont, and other stories. Can you tell us a little bit more about the stories, including the 3 Vermont students, and what sort of impact that's had on the greater Arab American community?
Right. The 3 Vermont students is a clear example of a hate crime based on their Palestinian identity, based on being Arab, because these individuals were just walking and wearing a keffiyeh in Vermont, and they were shot. And that is an example of they didn't say anything. There was no confrontation. They were clearly targeted because of what they were wearing and because of they were perceived to be. They are actually Palestinians. So, those hate crimes are happening. The unfortunate part, and I think many in the hate crimes field will tell you, for every story that we hear, there are a number of others that we don't hear about. And there are a number of other people that are not reporting, that are not speaking up. And that is a major concern, that there is a fear of coming forward and a fear of reporting the hate crimes again. And that's something we're telling the community that does not need to be there. We'll help you, we'll walk you through it. And a number of organizations are addressing and working on that. But the cases are there. We're hearing of the students that are bullied, the students that are being told to go home because of a shirt they're wearing, being physically attacked. on the playground. And we're not talking college students, by the way, when I say this. We're talking elementary, middle school students that are going through this. And we're seeing incidents in high school as well of students being harassed. In Georgia, you had a teacher verbally attack a student because she was Arab. So it's not isolated to just bullying. We're seeing it, peer-to-peer, student-to-student bullying. We're seeing teachers that are bullying. We're seeing teachers that are being discriminatory against their students. And that's happening across the country. And look, the reality is a majority of these cases are going to follow the same fact pattern. They may not be sexy or may not garner all the headlines because they are very similar. But that's even what's more frightening is it is very, systemic, similar, happening in the same way, in different parts of the nation.
When people talk about the terms Islamophobia or anti-Arab racism or anti-Palestinianism, people might tend to conflate the terms. And so I wanted to ask you, as somebody who's been in the game for a long time, can you tell us some of the commonalities between the phenomena of Islamophobia, anti-Arab racism, and anti-Palestinianism? And the second part to that question, more importantly, can you tell us some of the distinctions that people should know about?
As with all types of hate, the commonalities and the similarities are we're facing the same type of evil. We're, the same types of individuals out there that hate somebody for being Muslim or hate somebody for being Jewish or hate somebody for being Arab. That's our common enemy. That's who we're all in this country fighting against, whether it be fighting against Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, anti-Arab sentiment. We're facing the same type of ideology that anti-immigrant, xenophobic ideology that don't want to see us here. So if you put yourself in the mind of the bigot, they may look at me and say, I don't like this Muslim. Or they may look at an Arab Christian and say, I don't like that Muslim. Yes, that's an Islamophobic attack because it's coming and stemming from the same type of bigotry. This is what the perpetrator believes. Again, same thing with what the Jewish community is going through with anti-Semitism. These are the same individuals that are pushing this type of hatred through. So our fight is common, our struggle is common, and our strategies need to be unified, and particularly with the Muslim community, the Arab community. But there has to be an understanding of the key differences, right? And an understanding sometimes also of how Islamophobia could be used to silence the Palestinian and Arab community. And I think many more are understanding that after 10/7. The 3 students in Vermont, for example, they were targeted because they were wearing the keffiyeh.
Right.
So that would be classified as an anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian hate crime.
Yes.
Now we can say, the driving force or the perpetrator or the shooter had Islamophobic beliefs. He also had anti-Palestinian beliefs, but he acted on those anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian beliefs by seeing the keffiyeh and hearing them talk Arabic. So that's an important distinction. Now, if they were wearing the keffiyeh and they were speaking Arabic, but said, "Hey guys, it's time for prayer," and then they started praying on his front lawn, now it's also an Islamophobic hate crime because he's targeting them for clearly being Muslim, right? So there are these nuances and distinctions that matter because that would allow us also give us the opportunity to address it the right way, right? So if we quantify this and say this is an anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian hate crime, now we have the space to talk about how we could prevent this from the future. And oftentimes what happens is, many will use Islamophobia, and then many organizations out there that may be pro-Zionist organizations or organizations that are anti-Palestinian organizations may say, well, we stand against Islamophobia. But they won't utter the words anti-Arab or anti-Palestinian hate crime simply based on their principles. They won't acknowledge the existence of Arabs or Palestinians, but they will acknowledge Islamophobia and then bring in Islamophobia experts, onto their side or into the room and make it look like they give the image or the perception that they care, right? But all of that is done to silence our voices. And the biggest way this played out where people realized this was a problem was in the handling of outreach to the community by the Biden administration post-October, where a lot of it shifted towards Islamophobia, but by default, by doing that, they kept out a lot of Arab, Palestinian, and particularly Palestinian Christians out of the room because it was under the umbrella of Islamophobia, and that caused a big problem and a big issue within the community and a big division between the community and the administration. So not understanding these nuances really led to a lot of problems and kind of hindered the administration's ability to get ahead of the hate crimes and the issues we saw, and we continue to see.
So let's unpack that a little bit about the administration and its relationship with the Arab American community, primarily since October 7th. Tell us a little bit more about what you've been hearing. What do you think the administration's headed in the right direction, the wrong direction, any direction? Tell us a little bit more about that from your perspective.
Look, from our perspective, I mean, the administration has been on the wrong side of a number of things. They fumbled outreach at the beginning. They could have handled outreach better, and they could have handled the genocide as a whole in a better manner. They could have made better policy decisions. They could have taken this far more serious in the first few weeks and really stood up and said, we're going to use our authority as the president of the United States. I'm going to use my authority to stop Israel from moving forward with this aggression, right? Set that all aside, even if it continued the way and nothing changed. The one area where they completely failed was the outreach and understanding of our concerns in the first week or two. Many attempts were made from Arab organizations, Muslim organizations, Palestinian organizations, to the administration saying, hey, this is going to continue. Here's what we're going to be saying. Here's how you can save face now in the community and what you should be saying, right? So there was a small window around October, first few weeks of October into early November, but they missed that window. And now we're seeing them struggling to get back into, into the community, struggling to get a good, ground of support in the community. Look, he has changed some of his rhetoric. He is taking action slowly, like by banning some weapons, transfers and sales. But there's the belief that that's happening because he's down in the poll numbers, right? So it's kind of like too little, too late. But he needs to move, and the administration needs to move on these issues, not because of poll numbers, but because he's the sitting president of the United States, and you're in power now, so you need to do the right thing, irrelevant, not concerning poll numbers or any political fallout.
So I got to ask you a follow-up question to that. Obviously, because of all of this, we saw during some state primaries where people were filling in undecided for casting their vote or not casting their vote. Obviously, you and I again have been in the game for a long time, and we know that there's a big difference between primaries and a general election against a guy named Donald Trump. What do you think will happen come November when it comes to the general election? Particularly when it comes to the Arab American swing votes in a state like Michigan, let's be honest, even Ohio to a certain extent, but Michigan primarily, right? Everybody's like, oh, we're going to vote undecided, we're not going to vote. And for a lot of people, not voting for Biden is like a vote for Donald Trump. That can't be denied either. So what do you think the calculus will be by the time in 6 months we get to November 24th, particularly when it comes to the Arab American community?
I think if the elections were held today and if this continues, I don't see Biden winning Michigan. And I see that him losing is because he didn't do enough to gain back or win the support of Arab and Muslim voters in the state. I think the uncommitted campaign sent a clear message, but you're right. Primaries are different than the general election. We know this, and I think the country knows this. But what the campaign and Democrats are betting on is that the community will be afraid of a second Trump term or would be forced into voting for Biden. And that's where they're miscalculated. The community is not afraid of a second Trump term. You're going to have individuals that may vote for Trump. That's their decision to do so. And you're going to have some individuals that may sit home and say, I'm going to sit this one out. Most likely what you're going to see is a good number of individuals, take the down ballot races seriously and possibly skip top of the ballot or vote third party. But I can tell you unequivocally that a second Trump term, it's going to have its problems, it's going to have its fights, but right now that's not, scaring people into voting for Biden, and I don't think it will. And I think the one wild card in all of this that people keep missing, which I keep letting folks know that they need to take seriously, is the outreach efforts of the Trump campaign to the community. Like, don't underestimate the Trump campaign, their outreach efforts, the way they've been meeting with the community, the language they're using, and their encroachment onto our community. And I think that's going to also pull away voters, from the Dems and from Biden. So we'll see how this plays out. A lot could change over the next few months, but I kind of see it, playing out in the way I just described, that he's not going to win a number of these voters back, and it's going to hurt him in the key swing states.
So for the last question, Abed, I want to talk a little bit about social media, right, and the internet and its role in silencing people, during this war. You obviously talked about sort of the employment aspect of people's social media posts, but generally speaking, can you tell us a little bit about the silencing on social media, particularly when it comes to TikTok and in other, social media apps these days?
Absolutely. Look, the silencing of our community, the silencing of folks on Instagram, the Meta platforms, TikTok, this needs to be a concern for all Americans. This is not a Muslim, Arab, or a Palestinian issue. It is at the moment, right now, because these are the posts that are being tagged. We're the individuals that are being targeted. Just like post 9/11, we were the individuals that we were the guinea pigs for the Patriot Act and the new powers given to the state. That's similar to what's happening now in the social media sphere, where the targeting of our communities, the silencing, the taking down of accounts, that's scary, that's dangerous, and that's something many Americans need to open up and say, wait a minute, irregardless whether or not I agree with these guys, I may disagree completely, but they should have a right to say this. So from the beginning, if you look at the tactics used to target our community, and this ties into the anti-Arab, anti-Palestinian sentiment and the willingness to trade in and take away some of our rights and our voices just to protect interests in the foreign policy, right? So people were getting fired in the workplace because they were speaking up. As soon as media coverage started about what was happening in Palestine and in Gaza, you began seeing pro-Palestinian voices pulled off air. And go back and check. In the first 2 or 3 weeks, you wouldn't find any of our community members on CNN or on MSNBC. So then they took to social media and began, posting almost immediately, putting the pictures out there. When we started going to protests and taking to the streets, we were told, oh, they're anti-Semitic. We need to shut these protests down. Another form of silencing. College encampments, silencing, get them out of here. We don't need them here. They're anti-Semitic. So these social, the tactics used in social media is part of silencing the community, and it really does need to be taken seriously. And I'll ask everybody just to picture how different things would have been if after the Iraq War, we had social media. If after 9/11, entering the Iraq War, social media existed. You had millions of people taking to the streets in the anti-war movement in 2003, 2004, and once Iraq started. How different would things have been if there was a TikTok, or there was Instagram Live, or there were Reels, and people were able to see what's happening in Iraq? So this is the importance of social media these days, and having this tool for the truth and images to come out. And this is a fight for all Americans, and it's something that at ADC we're committed to seeing through. We have a number of campaigns we'll be working on, and first and foremost is working towards getting social media companies recognized as public utilities and putting rights back into the platforms to ensure we're all equally treated on it. And I think personally that's the only fix that's going to stop what's happening.
Abed Ayoub, thank you so much for joining us today on the Unpacking Islamophobia podcast.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
For more information, please visit bridge.georgetown.edu. We'll see you next time.